Thanks for joining us for the first of a series of episodes exploring the connection between nursing staff and security with the goal of promoting better collaboration while sharing perspectives from both sides. Today, we're joined by Renee Thompson, CEO and founder of the Healthy Workforce Institute. Our discussion today is focused on nurse bullying and incivility. I hope you find value in the episode. The Healthcare Security Cast is sponsored by 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And by Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com. And by the Change Execution Group. Visit 360lifetransformations.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brine Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Thursday, January 14th. We're joined today by Renee Thompson. Renee, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Brine, for having me here.
Oh, very, very glad to have you on the show. Now, I always like to start off by learning a little bit more about our guest. So I'll start off by asking, who is Renee Thompson?
Oh, good question. Well, I have been a nurse for almost 30 years now and really started my career at the bedside, as most nurses do. And then I always say that I've pretty much done everything that you can do as a nurse, from bedside nursing. I was an educator. I worked for a home care agency. I worked for a managed care company. I was an executive for a while. And you know what, Brine? I got to the point where I realized that it didn't matter what organization I worked for, what role I had. There was always another group of nurses, I swear, who made it their mission to make my life miserable. Like, would make it difficult for me. And I got to the point where I thought, you know what? Enough is enough. I mean, working in healthcare, as we all know, especially now, is hard enough without worrying about your coworkers making it more difficult for you. So I decided to do something about it, took a leap of faith, quit a great job that I love to start my own company with the intent to really eradicate bad behavior in healthcare. And that was 10 years ago. So now I am the CEO and founder of the Healthy Workforce Institute. And we're the only company in the world dedicated to eradicating bad behavior in healthcare alone.
Awesome. No, that's a really great summary. Now, in our discussion today, we're going to focus on nurse bullying, which is something that you alluded to, and civility. So for the context, what is nurse bullying and how does it manifest itself in healthcare working environments?
Believe it or not, you might not think that that's such an important question. However, it is, because a lot of people are confused about what bullying is and what bullying is not. So, for example, we tend to label all bad behavior bullying, and that's not correct. There's no legal definition for bullying in this country. However, the agreed upon definition, it's the repeated patterns of disruptive behavior with the conscious, I know I'm doing this to you, or unconscious, not even aware, attempt to do harm. And when we look at bullying behavior, we look for three things. Number one, there has to be a target. Let's say you and I work together and there's just something about you that I don't like. So as a nurse, I give you the worst assignment, I nitpick you to death, I criticize you in front of everyone, but I'm fine with everyone else. It's just you I don't like. So there has to be a target. The behavior has to be harmful in some way. And when we look at harm, we look at harm to patients. So if I ignore you, give you the silent treatment, withhold information from you to set you up to fail in healthcare, that affects someone's mom or someone's, child or partner. And then we look for the third criteria is that the behavior has to be repeated over time. It can't just be one time I get testy with you in a crisis situation, because we can all misbehave when under a lot of stress. And what I find is that there's actually not as much bullying as you would think. However, there's an awful lot of incivility. And that's what we really see more often. It's the condescending, rude, inconsiderate. It's the gossiping, the eye rolling, it's favoritism. That's what we see more of in healthcare. But it's important to know the difference.
Right. And I guess just to dive into that a little bit, how I've always understood civility was that it's basically just any behavior that's outside of what's accepted as civil behavior, if you will. Would you say that's an accurate definition, or would you expand on that a bit?
I would expand on it a little bit, and I'll give you this other perspective. When I go into an organization, and I describe it this way, and if you're in healthcare, you understand this. When you bring a new patient into the organization, we have to do this admission assessment. And what we have to do is basically lift up the covers and look under the gown. Like, you really have to find out what's going on with that patient before you can diagnose and then solve that patient's problem. It's the same thing. So I'll go into an organization and I'll pull back the covers, lift up the gown to see what's happening. And as I said, not a lot of bullying, but an awful lot of incivility. If you can identify that somebody's actually bullying someone else, that's almost easy to address. You've got policies about that. However, incivility, not so easy, because incivility is culture. And when you hear people say things like, well, that's just the way it is here.
Yeah.
Or, that's just her personality. Don't let anything she says, don't take it personally. That's what makes me think this is incivility that sort of infects and determines the culture. And it's actually, the work that we do is more culture work than actually addressing bullying. But it is that low level, subtle, accepted norms of just rudeness, disrespect, unprofessionalism.
And it's funny that you give that specific example of don't take it personally, because that's usually a pretty good precursor for something that's going to be said that you should probably take personally. And
That's not the best way to to start off wanting to give someone some feedback. Or people will say, oh, you're going to have to grow a thick skin if you're going to want to survive here. And it has nothing to do with the patients and everything to do with the people who work there. And again, working in healthcare is hard enough without worrying about who you're working with that shift. Because when I was a staff nurse, everything was about you come into work, you look at the assignment board. It's not to see what patients you're caring for. It's to see who you're working with, because that will make or break your shift. And you know what, Brine? It shouldn't be that way. It should never be that way. And so that's, again, I think it's so important, especially for those of you who are listening to this, to really pay attention to how we've normalized bad behaviors in healthcare to the point where we just accept them as the norm. And like I said, not okay.
absolutely. Now, what was your experience with this type of behavior? You alluded to it a little bit, but in your experience as a nurse, how did you see this throughout your career?
Well, I experienced it myself, especially when I was a new nurse. There were some nurses that I would pray, before the end of my shift, that I didn't have to give them report. Because that's where I think a lot of new nurses have the most anxiety, is shift report, especially if they're giving report to one of those nurses who are, let's just say, they've been there for a really long time. And we know the phrase, nurses eat their young. If they're known for being one of those nurses, I would have nurses who would nitpick me to death. And I would spend all of my time trying to just make sure I knew everything so that they wouldn't yell at me. And then I'm thinking, in retrospect, I was spending more time trying not to get yelled at by the other nurses than I was caring for my patients. That's not okay. And so I remember my preceptor when I was a brand new nurse, who made my life so difficult by making me think that I was stupid, by making me, like, every time I would ask her a question, she would yell at me, and she would even say, "You mean they didn't teach you that in nursing school?" And honestly, I got to the point where I was considering quitting. And if it weren't for my boss, if it weren't for my manager who knew that there were some things happening, that I wasn't being treated well, and it was the other nurses who told her this. I didn't say anything because usually the targets, like 40% of the targets never speak up. Okay. But everybody knows it's going on. My manager called me and she said, "Look, I know it's been happening, and I want you to know that you're a good nurse, and you're going to come back into work on Monday, and I'm going to give you a new preceptor." I'm telling you, if she wouldn't have done that, I may have quit. And then, you know what, Brian? It wasn't just as a staff nurse or as a new nurse. It was when I was a new educator. There were other educators who would set me up to fail. When I was in an executive role, when I worked for a home care company, it just never, there was always at least one or two people who I swear wanted to see me fail for whatever reason. There's lots of reasons why people are like that. You know, they're insecure, they're jealous, you know, that I always say you shouldn't have to be a psychiatrist to lead people, but it certainly helps if you know some psychology. So,
Absolutely, it does. Looking at actually, it's a good segue to when you talk about psychology and just understanding, I guess, some of the impacts. And you alluded to this earlier as well, but what are some of the impacts that this type of behavior has on both the nursing staff and their delivery of care to the patients?
sure. Well, we see significant issues with nurses who are targeted, the targets of bullying, or even just sort of rampant incivility. After a while, they will leave you. Retention is closely linked to culture. If people feel supported, if they feel a sense of belonging, you know, Gallup does a lot of this work. And if you look at some of the other studies, if there's a department where bullying and incivility are ignored by the leader, those nurses will leave. And some of the statistics are up to, you know, 60% of your new nurses will quit within the first year. So we know from a retention perspective that if bullying and incivility are going on, people will leave. But I also think about the emotional, the psychological, the physical effects that bullying has. Right now, I have to respond to an email. There was a nurse who reached out on our website to basically say, "I'm being bullied and it's making me physically ill. I don't know what to do." I'm like, "Oh my gosh," I have to respond to her. But I get emails like that all the time from nurses. And so we know that there's a direct impact to nurses. However, I want you to think about this. If you're working with a person who you consider the bully, okay, and you're afraid of this person, and you know that, you know, you have to walk on eggshells around them, you're not paying attention to your patients, are you? You're focused on trying to avoid a confrontation with that bully. So it's a distraction to patient care. And we know, studies show time and time again that bullying and incivility have a detrimental impact to patient outcomes. I mean, numerous studies show that. It's actually shocking that there are so many studies that show the negative impact disruptive behaviors have on patients that more organizations aren't addressing it. Shocking.
Very. Now, and you touched on this a little bit as well, but so I'm going to kind of ask about some of the numbers that are out there, and obviously statistics do change as you know as more information becomes available, and we take certain steps towards correcting things. But what are some of the numbers that kind of stand out for you that you could share with us?
There was a study not too long ago from Johns Hopkins that showed 71% of physicians and nurses have linked incivility to medical error. I think it was 23% of them said it led to a patient's death. There was another study that showed 99%, so that's pretty much everyone, physicians and nurses believe bad behavior leads to bad patient outcomes. And again, with studies like that, it's shocking that more organizations aren't taking action, you know, aren't doing something about it, because we know the negative impact that it has.
Absolutely. And yeah, 99%. I'm just curious who the 1%
Yeah,
is that didn't find any challenges with that.
person was having a rough day. They didn't read the question. Okay.
You know what? Maybe they were a victim of bullying. They were just scared to answer. Who knows?
Or maybe they were the bully.
Oh, you know what? That's an even better call.
Yeah.
Good call on that one.
I created an assessment. It's a self-assessment, 15 questions, and the assessment is called "What if you're the bully?" Because it can't be everyone else. And it's not to say that you're a bully or you're not a bully, but do you contribute to that sort of unhealthy work culture in some way by maybe not speaking up when you witness disruptive behaviors, or laughing when somebody else is mocking one of your coworkers instead of saying, "Hey, time out here. Not okay the way you're talking about this person right now." So we all contribute in some way, and this self-assessment it's just an awareness, and I think that's so important. We've normalized deviant behaviors for so long in healthcare that we fail to recognize them. So the first step is really to heighten awareness of behaviors that truly undermine a culture of safety and a respectful workforce culture.
And actually, that's a great segue for the next question I was going to ask you as well. Looking at workplace violence is something that's
Yes.
kind of become accepted as a norm among nursing staff, security staff. Do you see bullying and incivility as something kind of along the same lines where people just start to accept it as part of their job?
Yes, I think it's all under the same umbrella. And when you look at, and let's just say disruptive behaviors, you have workplace violence, which could be verbal or physical violence. So if you look at the spectrum, obviously physical violence is at the high end of that spectrum. And that violence can be employee to employee. Most often, what we're hearing out there right now is patient to employee. And, that's a significant issue right now. And I think that's where we see a lot of, well, they had dementia, they were confused. So it goes unreported. And we've done some work with this where how do you identify a patient who might be escalating to the point where they may display some physical violence, because it usually starts with some type of verbal violence. So we take a look at that, under that umbrella of disruptive behaviors. There's the workplace violence, which at the high end is the physical violence, but workplace violence also includes verbal violence. And again, we see this happening employee to employee, or patients and their family members to employees. But again, well, that's just the way it is in healthcare. We accept it as the norm.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, we're speaking to healthcare security leaders today. So, in terms of healthcare security leaders, what can we do to support an environment that's free of bullying, of nurse bullying, of incivility? How can we support that?
Thank you so much for asking this, because I see this a lot with nurses, and when I'm in their department and we're talking about workplace violence, and what do you do? First of all, it's reporting it. Again, it goes underreported so often because we justify it. Well, it's not that big of a deal. I didn't get hurt. Okay. It's making sure, and I think this is where the security officers can play a bigger role in helping them help to make it easier for healthcare employees to report incidents of any type of workplace violence, through a reporting system, or just I'm going to call someone, or I'm going to shoot somebody an email just to start that process so that they know. The other thing is, I think it's important that they build a relationship with the employees in those departments. So my husband is retired from law enforcement, and because he helps us now in the business, like his second career. And he's done a lot of work with some of our clients and looking at that whole relationship building with the security team, security officers, and the front line. And even if it's doing rounds, and that's one of his recommendations, is that as a security officer, that you do rounds periodically on these units. Let them get to know who you are. It's important for you to get to know who they are. And then the third, Brine, is be responsive. If a nurse or a technician is calling you, or they know exactly what to do if they've been at the receiving end of some type of violence, that if they call, if that's what the process is, if they call, that somebody's going to be responsive and not, blow them off or say, well, it's not, did you really get hurt? Because I've heard these stories from people that they're kind of blown off. So that would be my recommendation, those three.
Excellent. Now we've covered a great deal of some of the challenges that exist and the work that you do. Is there anything I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to discuss at this point?
Probably what I think is important, especially if you have leaders listening, and I know a lot of leaders that are the ones who are on these types of podcasts to really learn what they can do. We need to do a better job equipping our leaders with the skills and tools that they need to set behavioral expectations and really hold people accountable for professional conduct. And we see this often. It's, we have people, leaders in pharmacy and housekeeping. We have leaders who are nurse leaders, the front line, physician leaders. I'm telling you, we don't include content. We don't provide skill development to help them to be able to set behavioral expectations with their teams. And then again, hold each other accountable for professional conduct. This is where involving HR, your HR department, to really take a look at setting a standard of excellence. Like, we don't treat each other like that here, and giving leaders the tools that they need. Because I'm telling you, I haven't found one organization yet who does this well.
Wow. Okay. Well, what can we expect to see from you in the future moving forward? What are some of the things that you're working on? And I know you've been very active. So what should we be looking for from you?
Yes. So if I go back 10 years, really, I started this company as me. It was just me. I was speaking on stage and talking about bad behavior and what you can do. And so many people, I guess it really resonated with them, because I am all about the practical strategies. Say this, do that. Okay. That's what, I think leaders and employees need. And from there, people started asking me to do more consulting and helping them. And I never thought I'd be a consultant. And now actually it's probably where I spend most of my time, is doing consulting. And to help with all of that, we have an online academy with several online courses that really equip leaders with the skills and tools that they need. And we're actually in the middle right now of revising some of those courses to really take a look at all healthcare leaders, not just nurse leaders or people in pharmacy or HR, but like, we're really taking a look at EVS. And what about not just the inpatient hospitals, but clinics and, all the ambulatory care. So that's what we're working on right now, is expanding our academy. And it was actually good timing, especially now with all the social distancing and we're not traveling as much as we used to. So, and we're really looking at what else can we do to truly equip leaders. That's our primary audience, is making sure that leaders are equipped, because if you have an equipped leader, then the employees benefit from that. So you can affect more people in a positive way.
Excellent. And as we wrap up, do you have a special message that you'd like to share with the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Yes, especially working in healthcare. Okay. People don't always realize that the way we treat each other should be just as important as the care that we provide. And we tend to justify bad behavior because somebody's so good at what they do. And we can no longer afford to do that. So my final message is, even if you understand why somebody's misbehaving or acting out, we still have to address it, because what you ignore, you promote.
Absolutely. And I guess as far as the work that you do and the resources, what are the best ways that we can connect with you?
Sure. The best way is just to head on over to my website. It's healthyworkforceinstitute.com. And on my website, you can find all of my social media platforms. I've been blogging for the last 10 years. I've won numerous awards for my blog. We have a plethora of resources. You can learn more about our academy there. And on our homepage, there's a resource. It's 8 ways to stop unprofessional conduct, which includes 31 different scripts that you can use in certain situations. And it's probably right now our most popular resource because, again, leaders want to be told, like, what do I say to this person? Okay, what do I do? And that's where, again, those practical skills and strategies are so helpful. So yeah, just hop on over to my website and have fun.
Excellent. Excellent stuff. Well, thank you very much for making the time today to be on here, Renee. I greatly appreciate it. And there's a lot of value in this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. It's truly been an honor, especially because your audience right now is all about, protecting people in healthcare, and whatever I can do to support them, you just let me know.
And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Join us next week when we're joined by Mark Reed. We'll get Mark's insights on leadership, training, succession planning, and a number of other things. And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Thank you for tuning in. Join the Healthcare Security Cast community. To join, text START to 647-372-2042. Again, that's text START to 647-372-2042. Follow the Healthcare Security Cast on LinkedIn and Facebook, and join the Healthcare Security Cast community groups on both platforms as well. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And of course, you can always connect with me on social media. I'm the only Brine, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton, on any of these platforms. For any of these links, visit my website, Brine, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton.com. That's brinehamilton.com. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe and take care.